Today I'm sitting here in the wonderful winelands of near Stellenbosch on the Isara estate, and it's been a wonderful weekend of gin and wine and food, and I think there's no better way to end this weekend than with having a conversation with the much loved wine commentator and food commentator Michael Olivier. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Holger. It's lovely being with you.
And we've been friends for a long time,
yes.
But we only met this weekend.
Yes, absolutely.
Isn't that the modern world?
Absolutely, but great fun.
We should all have T-shirts saying, "Are we Facebook friends?"
Yes.
So we're here for the Pure Gin Festival at Isara, and yeah, it wasn't only Michael. There were quite a few gin makers that I hadn't met in person, although we'd been working together. And yeah, it's just been a wonderful, wonderful weekend, well organized.
Absolutely, and are they not wonderful people too? I mean, they've all got their funny little quirks and, different shaped bottles, beautifully designed labels, interesting different gins. It was a real experience.
Yeah, and how has the world? The world of wine and the world of gin. Are there any similarities?
Look, I think the one thing about gin is that you can't make it in your bathtub overnight. But I was talking to Colin and Leslie from Ginsmiths last night, and they were saying from the time they start on a Thursday evening, by the Friday of the next week they have the gin. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're a winemaker and you're making a fine Stellenbosch Cabernet and it's lying in an oak barrel for 15 months or whatever, and then you want to bottle it and cork it and then leave it lie down for possibly another couple of years. So while you might find a 2018 Shiraz on the supermarket shelf now with a screw cap, if you're looking at the really serious stuff that you're going to be paying 200 rand a bottle for, that's going to take you 3 years, 4 years probably before it hits the market.
And your family had to arrive on a ship here many, many centuries ago to claim the land.
Yes, absolutely. And start off, what is this lovely story about how do you end up with a small fortune in the wine business? You start off with a big one.
Exactly. So either come from Holland or from Johannesburg.
Yes.
But your story starts in the winelands.
It does.
As a little boy.
Yeah, my dad was he was a bomber pilot in the Second World War. I mean, how these guys did it when they were like 18 and 19 and they were flying over Europe and dropping bombs on Dresden and these sort of places. And he came back. His father was the first radiologist in Cape Town. His brother and sister had both qualified. His brother as a doctor and his sister as a botanist. And he came back, by which time my grandfather had bought 2 farms in Durbanville, one of which was a wine farm, one of which was a wheat and sheep farm. And so it was the obvious thing for my dad to go to Stellenbosch University and study viticulture and enology. And which he did, of course, he was an older student.
Because he'd been to the war.
Because he'd been to the war. And he was very fond of whiskey and brandy and various other things, smoked like a trooper. And when they came along to initiate him as a new student, he told them to push off. But he made good wine, which was he sold it to KWV and to the then Stellenbosch Farmers Winery. He had Cinsault grapes that he sold to Nederburg for their rosé and whatever. So that was where I grew up, and the life of a child on a farm in the 1950s and 60s was just totally idyllic. And it never really stopped from there. I mean, I went into the hotel business. I then landed up in London at the Cordon Bleu Cookery School. So food and wine have been part of me. I mean, I'm now 72 years old, for quite a long time.
But doesn't every son of a wine estate or wine farmer also play rugby at a famous boys' school.
Yes, I unfortunately missed out on that one because I had an accident when I was 13,
Okay.
which put me out of commission for 2.5 years.
Okay.
And so I didn't quite, but my son made up for it. Yeah, yeah.
And if you hear the noise, it's the wind that's blowing through what are these
Plane trees.
The plane trees. Yeah, beautiful location. We can't sit inside. It's just too beautiful to be outside. Okay, and then you studied in London.
Yes, and then I worked.
Was it normal or was it a big exception?
What
to study in London?
I think what was, I mean, if you could call it normal. I think people of my age, most of them went to the Lausanne Hotel School, and did the whole thing. I had worked.
Which sounds like it's Switzerland.
Yes, it is. Sorry, I had worked at Lanzerac in Stellenbosch for 3 years for the princely sum of 60 rand a month. And I'd worked in all the departments,
which is what they still pay.
And I'd not done much in the way of cooking, though I had been cooking at home from the time I was about 13. So that was where I wanted to focus, and really for ease because of the English. I went to the Cordon Bleu Cookery School in London, where I did the certificate and their advanced certificate courses. The mindset of the two ladies who owned the school, Rosemary Hume, famous British cookery teacher who, in fact, invented coronation chicken for Queen Elizabeth's coronation. Their mindset was very much of the rationing of food during the Second World War, which had only stopped 15 years before I arrived there, and also the purity of French cooking. So it was very, very interesting the way the whole thing operated. But certainly it taught me the basics, and I'm a great believer if you understand and can operate and do the basics, you can virtually do anything. And we eventually turned that into. We had 3 restaurants. Our last one was a national top 10 restaurant. And, if you've got a good team.
On the farm or where?
No, it was in Constantia, in Cape Town, on the sort of edge of the vineyards, in a lovely old Victorian house. It was called Parks. And we had that for 9 years before I took my first of 3 retirements.
But how do you start a restaurant? I mean, obviously you know how to cook when you learn all that. Do you also learn how to manage and run a restaurant?
Not at the cookery school. No. I mean, that's something I did it was a diploma in business management at Stellenbosch University. So that certainly gave me an edge on how to operate businesses. And if you got the right team, you got the right kitchen designer, you use a great interior designer, and we were very lucky that we had Jay Smith. She's one of Cape Town's leading designers, and in fact I took her to Australia when I did a consultation there at a Voyager Wine Estate in Margaret River, where we set the whole sort of tourism side up with 110-seater restaurant and beautiful interiors which Jay had done in a Cape Dutch style house in the flatlands of Margaret River.
But so was that your first business, the restaurant, or?
Yes, I'd worked for Anglo American before. I'd worked as PR manager at Bosch & Dahl.
Yeah.
We had the restaurant there, which was part of my brief.
Yeah.
But it was really in '86 that we went off on our own. There was a threat that we would be transferred to Johannesburg, which was by Anglo American, which is not where we wanted to be. Funny enough, we now live in Johannesburg very happily. So we then went off on our own. We had 3 restaurants. One was Padachang in Tilbach, a lovely old Cape Dutch building which had been restored after the earthquake in 1969. And then we had a restaurant in Hermanus above the old harbour called the Burgundy, which was huge fun. I mean, when the whales came, you'd have a lawn full of people eating lunch, and a whale would appear, and everybody would get up and run across the road to look at it. Waitresses coming out with plates of food and no guests at the tables. And then we landed up at Parks, and that was our last business, and that we closed down in 2002. And then I worked as a consultant wine and food specialist for Pick n Pay for a while.
But starting a restaurant 45 years ago must have been different to today.
Very. The whole style was very different.
Yeah, and the funding?
The funding came from an angel.
Okay.
We met somebody who he was a farmer. He had a farm in Constantia and one out in Wellington, and he loved good food. And he wanted a restaurant,
okay.
And we just happened to be there at the right time.
Okay, so it hasn't changed that much. You still need
angels. Yes, you do. Absolutely, okay. Even if it's your bank manager.
Well, they don't, unless I guess it's a franchise.
Yes,
it must be hard to start a restaurant.
It is.
Today.
Yeah, and the style of the restaurants now, of course, have changed so much. It's sort of good food eaten out on a pavement somewhere, and whereas the style of we were what people like to call a fine dining restaurant. Yeah. So having been up in the top 10, you had to be better today than you were yesterday, and you have to prepare to be better tomorrow, and you take your staff with you, and it's hard work. It's very hard work.
And who did it appeal to? The upper crust?
It was your high LSM, and we had a lot of regulars who used to come. I mean, I'm mad for people, so it was very special having people come back and back and back. When we opened in '93, we were fully booked for 3 weeks before we'd even opened for our first dinner. And it stayed like that for a good couple of years, which was great.
And the people came for the food and to see Michael, I guess.
Well, I think, they certainly came for the food. We had an interesting and unusual wine list, which John Platter did for me in the early days, and then I took it and ran with it. So we had some quite interesting wines. But of course, that was 1993. Now we're 2018. And the whole spectrum of wine has changed so much. The breadth of, people don't need cellars anymore. People don't even need vineyards anymore. And these young guns come out of college and they go off to Australia and Napa Valley and France and Italy and Spain and Portugal, all over the place. And they come back with ideas. And they don't want to work for anybody. They want to do their own thing. Yeah. And I don't think it's easy. But, they buy grapes from farmers, they buy cellar space from somebody, and they're producing some absolutely mind-blowing wines, these kids. Oh. They really are, which is very exciting.
Well, it's also, I guess, an opportunity if you don't have capital.
Absolutely. It's certainly the way to do it. Because if it doesn't work, you have no assets at all. You might have a tank or two of wine which you could sell to somebody, but these kids are exciting. I mean, young guys and young girls, and just producing mind-blowing stuff with interesting labels and interesting take on wines. Lovely sort of fruit-forward, ready-to-drink-now kind of stuff, and stuff that is sufficiently serious in order to be able to cool cellar it for a couple of years and then be sort of amply rewarded as a result.
It sounds like the way I would do it, because I can't imagine owning all those assets, even. Absolutely,
the staff, and that's the way to do it. And if you get good grapes, I mean, there's an Old Vines Association, which is started by Rosa Kruger and Andre Morgenthau, where they've gone around and they've listed every single old vineyard in the country. And what they're trying to do is that they're trying to convince wine farmers to continue growing grapes in these old vineyards, even though the crops are dropping. Instead of producing 8 to 10 tons a hectare, they're probably producing 1 to 1.5 tons a hectare. They then have to convince the winemakers to pay a premium price to the growers, which of course puts up the wine price in the bottle stores and specialty wine shops. But I still think we pay too little for top quality wine.
Yeah. We just want to pay unbelievable prices.
Yeah. Some of them are a bit unbelievable.
And what happened to the family farms?
The village crept up all round.
Okay.
My father sold the big wheat and sheep farm. The village crept up all round the wine farm, and he split it up into plots and created roads and sold it off plot by plot and retired to the seaside at the age of 43. In a house that he paid 10,000 rand for, and if you looked out of the front window and down, you looked into the sea. So it simply couldn't have been closer. Yeah. Oh. They had a rich life.
Yeah, at 43. Maybe not that healthy either to retire that early.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then after the restaurants, you said you did some consulting and...
Yes, I did consulting for a chap called Michael Wright, who amongst many businesses owned a Voyager wine estate down in Margaret River. And he loved South Africa. He loved the indigenous architecture. And he kept on saying to me, there's no classical architecture in Western Australia. It's all rammed earth and zinc roofs. And so he wanted, and I'd had that experience at Bosch and Dahl where he'd been. His architect was a chap called Geoffrey Summerhays, who'd studied Cape Dutch architecture at Johns Hopkins University in the States. And so we put this whole thing together, and this now H-shaped Cape Dutch building. If you know the Cape Dutch buildings well, you will know that there's something sort of slightly not kosher about it. But I've been there often, obviously, and there would be people would come from South Africa and burst into tears, And Geoffrey had a very clever way of creating a width in a room, which of course, the Cape Dutch buildings were limited to the height of the yellowwood trees that were growing around the buildings. But Geoffrey had this very clever way of creating greater width inside. So we opened with a 50-seater restaurant, and within 18 months they were serving 110 lunches a day. So we then had to build a wing on the back for another restaurant. And here you have this. It could be in Franschhoek, it could be in Stellenbosch, it could be in Paarl. Lovely restaurant, and they've just won in Australia. They've just won. Their chef has won the sort of top country restaurant chef, and the restaurant itself won the regional top vineyard restaurant. So they're doing really, really well. Unfortunately, Michael Wright, who was our client, became our friend. He died a couple of years ago, so the whole thing sort of came to an end for us. But it's a wonderful country with amazing, amazing people. Everybody kept on saying, it'll be just like South Africa, which of course it isn't, because they're totally different people. Amazing service ethic, amazing first world attitude to things. And if you wanted a side of salmon, well, then we'll just fly one over from Tasmania overnight. That kind of attitude that people had, which was incredible.
I think the currency is much stronger and probably allows for, everything is more expensive in Australia.
Yes.
So you can certainly offer something different.
Absolutely. Yeah. I did a Cape Malay buffet there, and I wanted to do smoked snook. And of course I couldn't find a game fish in Western Australia that was suitable. So I phoned the fishmonger. It was sort of 2:30 in the afternoon, and I said to him, "I've been told that you can offer sides of smoked Tasmanian salmon." "Oh yes," he said. So I said, "Do you think you'd get me 6 sides?" And he said, Yeah, sure. He said, but I won't have them for you for the morning delivery tomorrow. It'll have to be the afternoon delivery. So that sort of service, which was great. And of course, product, I mean, virtually anything you wanted. In huge Far Eastern population, people from Laos, people from Vietnam, Thailand, massive farmers market in Fremantle Harbour, which had a whole hall devoted to Far Eastern foods. I mean, incredible stuff. And of course, fish. I mean, there are sort of like 8 or 10 different kinds of crayfish, prawns, any number of fish, hand-dived scallops, because fortunately the seabed there is not suitable for drag netting. So you have these amazing scallops. I mean, I would land at Perth Airport always about 11 o'clock in the morning. And the first thing I would do was go to a friend of mine who had a restaurant and have scallops for lunch. But lovely. I mean, very special place. Very special.
And then you've also got you've had some dealings with Portugal.
Yes, I went in 2010. I went first in 2008 as a guest of Amorim, the cork people. You know, they're the biggest wine cork makers in the world, and way ahead in terms of research and development. I went as their guest to go and see the cork harvest and follow a piece of cork right through from Alentejo, which is to the east of Lisbon, right up to Oporto, where the cork arrived and was being turned into corks, which was a tremendous experience. And I was lucky to go up into the Douro Valley because Amorim owns a quinta up there, which has a fantastic hotel, and fell totally in love with the Douro Valley. And then I was very fortunate to be invited 2 years later by a chap called Anibal Coutinho, who is the wine guru of Portugal. He wrote a book, and it used to be called sort of like 257 wines under however many euros. Neil Pendock and I had written a book the year before, which we called The People's Guide. And so Anibal then changed the name of his to The People's Guide, and Neil and I went over. And we travelled, I was there for 15 days, I think, and we must have tasted almost 2,000 wines. And we literally sort of wrote the book as we were going along, and we'd get to these very, very well-run wine commissions, regional wine commissions. And we'd get there and they'd be ready for us, and Anibal would say, how many wines you got for us to taste? And they'd say 96 or 108 or whatever it was, and you just sit down and you just work your way through them. I loved Portugal. I would go back there at the drop of a hat. Fabulous food, great wine. And I was mentioning to you earlier about the wine estate people they'd sort of cuddle up to you when you first got there, and they'd say, you know, we only have indigenous Portuguese varieties on our, or else they would cuddle up to you and they'd say, you know, we only have international varieties. So, and they did really well with the international varieties as well as they did with the indigenous stuff. I mean, there's a region called Bairrada where they have a grape called Baga, B-A-G-A, and Baga is not a popular grape. But to go there and to hear the Baga disciples talk about it and to drink it, you know, where it is made, very special indeed. I love that place.
And your book was then published in Portuguese?
It was published in Portuguese in Portugal, which is quite strange
to see your words.
to see your words. And the one thing that I did say in my introduction to the book was how sorry I was that the early Portuguese settlers had sailed past instead of stopping on here in the Cape, because I think from a food point of view and probably even from a wine point of view, things would have been very different.
Would have been, yeah. And you mentioned earlier you met the Duke of where?
The Duke of Braganza, who was he's the pretender to the Portuguese throne.
The pretender.
Yeah, and he and the Duchess came to a wine tasting in a hotel in Sintra, which is south of Lisbon, where Portuguese royalty had holiday homes. I mean, it's like fairyland. beautiful homes with the quirkiest architecture you've ever seen. But there was this one palace that had been turned into a luxury hotel, and we spent a couple of nights there. And one day we had this tasting of wine from Collage. And Collage is a tiny little wine region south of Lisbon, and my goodness, we had some amazing wines there, Holger. Some of the whites were like 23, 24, 25 years old, and wonderful reds, which had sort of lost their color and had gone slightly translucent, but gem bright and brilliant. And it was a very, very special experience, very special.
And, I mean, today we drink 2018 wines.
Yeah,
in the
happily.
Is that just a change in technology, or?
I think so. I think our winemakers have, they're certainly more travelled now. Stellenbosch University is still the place where majority of them train, but a number of them do go to universities in other countries in South Australia, and they spend a lot of time working in vineyards in Napa Valley or Barossa Valley or somewhere. And particularly in Australia, the wines are very sort of fruit forward, soft, easy to drink. And I think that's what's changed it. Obviously, there's still great wines made from varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon. You just take here in Stellenbosch, some of the great wines of South Africa are made here. But it's different. People have learned new techniques. The oak barrel is accepted, but now there are oak staves, there are oak chips, which give you that same sort of oaky support to the fruit. But it's much cheaper. And people can't afford to keep in their cellars wines for 10, 15 years and release them when they're ready to drink. And unfortunately, the public doesn't have cellars in their homes anymore, or the public don't have cellars in their homes anymore. So it's it's an interesting thing. People now have businesses where they set up cellars where you can hire space and leave your wines under ideal conditions. But I think the tendency here has been to create wines which are ready to drink virtually immediately. I mean, the other day I had a couple of 2018 reds which are on the shelves already, eminently drinkable, big, blousy, fruity, wonderful wines, easy to drink. I'm always amused. People say when I write about wine, and I say easy to drink, that I'm sort of condemning the wine with faint praise. But I mean, who would make a wine that's difficult to drink? And if it's easy to drink, it's so much greater pleasure, isn't it?
Yeah, tell us about your books. When did you start writing?
I did my first book in 2005.
Yeah. And
that was a sort of memoir type book where I, wrote about my family and my family life and my children and
is
friends.
It still available?
No. It's when the publishing company closed down, I bought the remainders, and I've still got a little stack of probably 30 or 40 at home. And then I produced a couple of books which I called Crush 100 South African Wines to Drink Now. It was a little book, and that's really what it was, and I chose my winemaker of the year and my favorite variety and all that sort of stuff. And then Neil Pendock and I, with Anibal Coutinho, did this a Guia Popular, it was called, a Portuguese wine book. But Neil and I, the year before, had done the People's Guide, which was essentially a guide to sort of supermarket kind of wines. And then, I discovered that you don't really need to publish books anymore. You can do it on the internet. So that was really when my website started growing. And we now have an amazing following, and I even succeeded in selling out a wine once for a producer, which was probably quite fun. But I think they had a bit of problem, people wanting the wine and it wasn't available anymore.
Yeah, that's called an influencer then.
Yes.
So, and I mean, writing books, did that make money?
No.
No, okay.
No, it simply doesn't. I mean, unless you, with the People's Guide, we actually actively went and looked for sponsors. So the costs were covered, and in fact covered to such a degree that it was blind tastings that we did, and we had, Norma Ratcliffe was with us. Annabelle came out from Portugal. We had a sommelier, had Kathy Marston, who was a restaurateur at that time, about to become a wine educator. And for that book, we actually donated, because it was blind tastings, we donated a dog to the Guide Dogs for the Blind. And it was quite amusing because I was invited to the graduation of this dog. And he was beautiful. He was a cross Weimaraner Labrador, the most beautiful dog. And his person for whom he was going to guide was a telephonist at the police station in Durbanville, where I was born and where I grew up, which was wonderful.
That's a lovely story.
Very special, yeah.
Yeah, and so I guess the books help to build your profile, and I'm going obviously towards the brand Michael Olivier and the website and all that. Is that, I mean...
Yeah, it certainly did. They certainly did. And building the website, of course, was the way to go for me.
Yeah.
We're now, I think, in our third incarnation in terms of design and back office technology.
So what is the purpose? It replaces you publishing books which don't make money, so you might as well make websites that don't make money? Or?
Well, no, I think what you have to do is you have to learn how to monetize your website, so that you don't really look like you're advertising.
Yeah.
So we have website partnerships. We've got about 20 wineries.
And do they pay you a monthly fee?
They pay us a monthly fee, and we talk about them. I broadcast on Fine Music Radio. And then we've just approached a company in Gauteng which does advertising on websites. It was started by two bloggers who wanted to monetize their websites. And we've just approached them, and they need a month's worth of Google Analytics, which I don't believe in, by the way. They need a month's worth of Google Analytics information in order to proceed. So it'll be quite interesting to see in the new year how that works out. And then just to be able to offer different and innovative packages to potential sponsors.
Yeah. So you approach sponsors yourself? Or
Yes.
What? Okay.
Yes, I do. And I choose people who I respect, who I admire, and whose wines I like.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting because, there are some big wineries, and of course the people change as they do with big brands. So I find myself having to build new relationships with old partners quite often. But, the smaller, more family-owned wineries are people that we go back a long time with and whom we love dearly and who like what we do for them.
So what do you do for them?
Well, what we do is we have the website. We had in November, we had 1.4 million hits on the website.
In November?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they have a page on the website which has got pictures of the farm and the tasting room, and we're open on Mondays to Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays, whatever. There might be a picture of the restaurant chef, winemaker. So they're always there on the website. And then once a month I do a radio broadcast for a wine that they choose. So then I put up a page, this is the wine of the day. Now we're busy doing advent calendar. So every day there's a new wine or wines which run alongside my website partners with the broadcasting that goes on. And if somebody's got Italian son of an Italian count whose family have been making wine in Tuscany for 800 years come to do a stage in their winery, and then I get a picture and I'll do a little story about it, or you take a place like a cheese place like Fairview. I mean, they make great wine, they make fabulous cheese. They might have some new traditional packaging or new cheese and then we do a little piece about them. I do a lot of work on Twitter and Facebook. I've got over 5,000 Twitter followers. So if I go Facebook, Twitter, Instagram with one post, I can hit sort of between 8,000 and 9,000 people. And those are people who specifically have asked to follow me.
Yeah.
So it's not like I've been and, paid whatever it is to get 4,000 followers, which might include a lady butcher from Sarasota or something who has no interest in me. But the thing is that what I do find interesting and amusing is obviously the use of hashtags. I think is very important. And I will put up a post, as I did for the Gin Festival yesterday. And I probably had 8 or 10 gin producers, gin bars suddenly following me on Twitter.
From all over the world.
From all over the world.
Yeah.
And I sort of think, how the hell does Joe Blogs from Barbados know about me?
Yeah.
And I look across at Maddie and she says, hashtags.
Yeah, I don't like hashtags. It's a lot of work, isn't it?
It is a lot of work.
Yeah.
But it's important because it grows your following.
And that's on Instagram or?
That's on Twitter and Instagram, yeah.
So I think my top post yesterday was the spliff-inspired cocktail by Connor from Monkston.
Okay.
And everybody loved the spliff-inspired cocktail. He probably had one of those before he made his monks.
Yes, absolutely.
Cannabis or his Hempton. Yeah. Well, I find it fascinating how you can, how your brand can adapt over the centuries with it, or centuries with it.
Yes, centuries. In my case, centuries.
In your case, centuries. From publishing on paper to hashtagging.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
you have to do that. Tell us a little bit about your radio or your broadcasting stuff. You record those at home. You don't. Yes, I do. You don't go into a studio.
I do. I used to go into a studio when I lived in Cape Town. Now I live in Johannesburg in the leafy Linden, and as you know, I've had an accident in March, and it's taken me sort of 9 months to recover from it. But I have my laptop by my bedside, and I just simply go to my podcast recording program and I do it, and I send it down here, and this is to Fine Music Radio, and there's a lovely technical chap there called Mawande Lobby, and Mawande and I have worked together for 3 or 4 years, and he knows me and he knows my style, and then he does the editing and he cuts out the ums and the ahs and then he puts headers and footers on and then sends them back to me, and then I actually embed them into my website when I'm writing about the particular wine. Yeah. So it's great fun. I enjoy doing it. I'm thinking of a bit like you, starting to create my own podcast program, because then it gives me much greater freedom. And just post it up on the website, and people will go and listen to it.
Yeah, I think podcasts are very intimate, and you get to know people intimately if you listen to them.
Yes, you do, absolutely.
And my mission is to help all these brand owners, I guess, to really tell their story, because I think it's 90% about the story, and
it is. The story is so important. Yeah. And you see, you just take those lovely people yesterday at the Gin Festival. Obviously one knows the gin. I've seen pictures of it, etc. And here you have this person who is a electronics engineer or cement maker or something, who's making absolutely sensational gin.
Yeah.
And look at the ginsmiths, Colin and Leslie. Two two retired psychologists living up in near Pickettburg who wanted to be retired, and now suddenly they're riding this incredible wave on a very, very small surfboard.
Yeah.
And producing medal-winning gins. I mean, the Ginsmith gins are just absolutely amazing. Interesting people, very interesting people.
Yeah, and that's it's a wonderful way to record the people. I mean, the relationships that you've built up
Absolutely.
over the years, and the people you meet, which I guess both you and I do. We get the opportunity while everybody has to work and do their daily thing. We meet interesting people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the challenge is always to monetize it and to get the most value out of those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And to help them punt their products to possibly to a different audience. It's very special. It's a lovely, lovely way to be retired, Holger.
Yeah. Well, I wish you well. I wish you lots of strength.
Thank you.
Your recovery and
Thank you.
Regaining your strength.
I get to throw away the walking stick.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing you without that stick.
Yeah, absolutely. So do I.
Yeah, and a good retirement in a new chapter in London.
Yes.
Have you been to the gin bar there? You know,
No.
We have made a gin bar for you in London. We have made a craft beer library for you in London. So there's some wonderful things happening.
I haven't ventured forth much,
Yeah.
but I do have a beautiful garden to look at from my bedroom window, and I'm a mad bird person. So that's been great fun too. But in the new year, I think I'm going to have to start moving out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's been great meeting you.
Oh, Holger, it's been such fun.
It's been great being here at Asara. It's such a lovely venue.
Isn't it amazing?
Wow.
Very special. So happy you could be here.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure.